For the longest time, I've heard so many great things about this game, but since I shared a PS4 with my brother until 2019, I never got a chance to try it out or most other console-grade experiences completely by myself. My first From Software game was Dark Souls 1 Remastered on the Switch, and since then, I've only completed the Demon Souls remake on PS5. But every time I completed another Souls game, I would always hear about how much better and harder Bloodborne is. So after being around 6 years late to the party, I finally decided to give it a go. I'll be splitting this review into 3 categories: the personality of the series, the gameplay, and the story. There will also be major spoilers in this review for the story, bosses, and areas. Also, my playthrough of Bloodborne was on my next gen buddy, Ps5. With that out of the way, let's get right into this. The personality. Bloodborne tries its best to make you feel helpless, scared, and insane all at once.
Oh my god!
And this isn't like the Power of X insanity I got from playing too much Halo for that review. Okay, maybe it's a bit similar.
Ah, you son of a gun.
But anyway, it's the small details that make you feel uncomfortable playing it. The sounds of the world and the enemies are one of the scariest and unnerving I've ever seen and heard in a game.
Oh. God. Dang it, that's terrifying.
Really, I didn't. Please, take my hand. Please, help me.
What the heck is that?
Even in the most basic of enemies, such as the Australian magpies or the church dwellers that sound like my uncle when he's about to swallow an entire pizza. Not to mention the hub world that blesses you with the groans of agony as you come back from hunting. So naturally, I felt right at home.
Ron, come here cuz I need to speak to you in your language.
But for some, it may be a lot to handle. Even when you kill certain enemies, your victory is drowned out by their horrific screams.
She's a witch.
Bloodborne wants you to feel the dread of its world as it plunges into chaos as the night goes on, and in my opinion has one of the best cosmic / psychological horror settings I've ever experienced in a video game. There were times when I was literally tense going to rooms or buildings as the music, sounds of enemies, and of your own footsteps overwhelm you with a sense of insecurity.
Oh, I know you. What the heck is that? Oh, Jay. Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God. This is actually jump scare galore. Oh, my God. Dang it. Whoa, Jesus. It's flipping my phone over. Every time. Oh my god. What was? What the heck? What trickery is this? Oh! Oh, great mosquitoes now.
Although the game does rely on jump scares occasionally, many settings are genuinely terrifying. So, that's how you feel when playing the game, but how does it actually play? Let's find out. If you've ever played other From Software games, then Bloodborne will seem very familiar to you, except a lot faster paced. All the core features of From Software games are here, such as leveling up, upgrading weapons, etc. But instead of a shield, you have a gun which can be used to counter enemies. This design choice forces players to think quicker, as there is no way to defend yourself other than to counterattack or dodge. I personally like this change as it forces players to dive into their worst nightmares headfirst instead of hiding behind a shield to stop attacks. A playstyle I was very accustomed to when playing both Demon Souls and Dark Souls. In those games, it's not really worth risking a parry most of the time because the shield would do a similar job while still allowing the player to be in a safe position. But Bloodborne forces players out of this safe zone, which was a bit difficult to get used to at first since the bosses are very intimidating, but once you get past this factor, the game becomes a lot less hard. To be honest, I've improved the most in Souls games by playing Bloodborne than both Demon and Dark Souls, since the factor of intimidation was what was holding me back in those games because most of the time I could hide behind my shield. For example, when versing Mikolash, I kept dying to his ranged AoE attacks as I would be so hesitant to run up to him and risk taking the hit. But that would cause him to loop the attack, leaving me no room to move. So to better prepare for that move, I chose armor that had higher defense against magic. I tried again with a massive boost of confidence. And from that confidence alone, pushed me to run up and aggro him to death without even allowing him to do the AoE attack once.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't even have to wear this stupid costume. Wow. Oh, it looks so bad. Oh, dang it.
So, all I needed was more confidence and a better strategy, not better armor. So, that's what the core gameplay is like. What about the enemies, bosses, and environments?
Oh my god, another freaking... Holy...
There is a large pool of enemies to verse, which helps mix things up in each area. Although you do get a repeat of a few enemies in some areas, most enemies and bosses feel coherent to their environments, as they usually are tied into the lore. This was one of my biggest problems for Demon Souls, as it felt that some bosses and regular enemies didn't really tell as much of a story. Maybe I just didn't notice it, but in Bloodborne it's definitely more prominent. One of my favorite examples of this is Cainhurst Castle. The abandoned castle is filled with the cries of the nobles who were slaughtered there.
Oh my god! My box.
the blood lickers that are outside looking for more blood after feeding off of the dead corpses of the massacre. The boss of the area is the king who ordered the execution, and most importantly, these bat guys, because they're like, wait, is that me? The enemies and bosses themselves are probably the scariest I've ever seen in a video game, though I don't play much from the horror genre. And generally speaking, I found the enemies to be all around more difficult than from the other Souls games I've played. Though, I do have to say, the hitboxes for some of the attacks can be a bit strange, as they might stay for longer than they should.
Are you freaking serious?
Or just glitch their way to your position. And other times, the bosses spawn a duplicate of itself for a brief moment, but those are just small moments. For the most part, the game works just fine.
What the heck? What was that?
The bosses are my favorite part of this game. It was the best feeling walking into a new boss room, anticipating how messed up it would end up looking or sounding.
Saw a sign, I rang it. Someone's coming in my game. Holy, what the heck is that? It's right there. Amygdala.
I know everyone has trouble with different bosses, but I personally had the most trouble with bosses from the DLC, like Ludwig or the Orphan of Kos, but Mikolash, as mentioned before, and Mergo's Wet Nurse gave me a bit of trouble as well. So for the most part, the bosses were really fun. But since this is a From Software game, there's always a bit of cheese when it comes to strategy. Usually leveling up for an hour does the trick, but other times you can walk past the enemy as he viciously misses you and runs into a wall. Other times they'll hit themselves by accident or just fall to their deaths mid-surprise attack.
What? Oh, I killed the ring woman. Should I have? What the heck was that?
Although the game has the least amount of cheese in comparison to the other Souls games I've played, it is still there one way or another. But that's the best part about From Software. They give you the freedom to come up with ridiculous strategies that usually end up working. For example, if you're having trouble on a guy that keeps one-shotting you, just toss all your poison throwing knives at him and wait it out. The game gives you the freedom to use anything and everything, and it usually works out. Speaking of which, let's talk about the weapons of the game. The fact that many weapons have 2 modes is a great design choice. It sets it apart from the other Souls games that came before it. Though I did find that some weapons have an objectively better mode, but it's still nice to have that variety. To be honest though, I'm not in a position where I can say much about the weapons since I basically used the first weapon and gun I got through my entire playthrough, because usually in Souls games you find more weapons throughout the world, but in Bloodborne, they're mostly bought from the shop in the Hunter's Dream, and I rarely use that shop, so I kind of forgot about using different weapons. But I like how they give you the ability to do that. I never felt like I was too underpowered or at a disadvantage with my standard gun and weapon, as long as I kept upgrading them at an appropriate time. I'm sure there are some great and unique weapons and guns out there, like the ones you find in the DLC, but I just haven't tried them. Just as a side note, there are a lot of costumes in the game as well, but I only used the one you see on the game's cover art for basically my whole playthrough except for that one fight with Mikolash mentioned earlier. So again, no real comment there except some of the outfits look really nice. Also, I forgot to mention the Chalice dungeons. These are levels that are sometimes randomly generated, while a few of them being the same for everyone. I wanted to finish every boss before beating the main story, so after dying to a wet nurse man a few times, I started cleaning up all the side bosses. So I ended up spending a lot more time in the Chalice dungeons than I thought I would. I found that some of the enemies and bosses to be harder than many of the areas in the main game.
No way. No. That's right, boys. That's right, freaking $1.
Which is what makes them fun and a good challenge even for those with higher player levels.
That's right. That's freaking right. Oh, gosh.
The dungeons extended my playtime with the game by around 10 to 15 hours. But with all that being said, because I wanted to defeat the Queen Yharnam boss for the trophy, which is found in one of the last Chalice dungeons unlocked, I did get a bit bored of seeing similar level designs and repeats of some enemies throughout each floor. And I had to do so many different chalices that all required materials to unlock, which also got tedious towards the end.
Great Fumera heal chalice. Finally. Dang, look at that. Finally, boys. Yeah, boys.
So they're still fun, but if you're trying to do all of them one after the other, it starts to get repetitive and tedious after a while.
Finally, Yharnam's done.
Alright, so now on the game's performance. I was playing on the Ps5, and sadly the game is still locked at 30 frames 1080p. And coming straight from the Demon's Souls remake, I did notice the obvious difference in loading times and sharpness of textures, as well as the game dipping below 30 frames in some areas, which never got so annoying that it was unplayable, but I'm just disappointed that From Software didn't optimize the game to at least a steady 60 frames or even support native or upscaled 4K. Did it take a while to get used to at first? Yes, especially because I just completed the Demon's Souls remake. But even with all these technological limitations, I still had more fun playing Bloodborne than I did with Demon's Souls, which I think is a testament to how great of a game Bloodborne is. I'm not saying that I didn't like Demon's Souls, it was great in its own right, but I just prefer Bloodborne, and one can only imagine how good of a game it would be if they remake it for the PS5. Now it's time for the final section, the story. Spoiler warnings for main story and DLC, you have been warned. I'm not gonna lie, I missed a lot of details about the story throughout my playthrough, especially because I played it over a span of a few weeks, so I would often forget important names like Burgundworth, Vile Blood, and Pale Blood. So most of what I learnt from the story was from lore videos on YouTube. Would highly recommend Vadi Vidya's channel if you're interested, but yeah, that's the appeal of the story. It's hidden in the environment, item descriptions, and the few dialogue / cutscenes you get throughout the game. I don't have too much to comment on the story since I still don't fully understand it completely, and it does kind of deserve a video on its own, but it's definitely a brave and daring one. Everything has a sad ending, and that's especially seen in the smaller stories told. I have to hand it to them. The devs had the guts to not only imply that the worst outcome happens,
and she went to find him, but now she's got...
but also showing them to the player. And it does this many times. Once you dig deep into the lore past face value, you'll understand that many of the game's mechanics tie into the lore heavily. For example, the blood healing and the insight you use all stem from the divide in approach to contact and research about the Old Ones, these being the Bergenworth Scholars and the Blood Healing Church. As you keep progressing, it becomes increasingly clear that you're a small part of something far greater. Gods of old punishing humans for the lust for the hunt of beasts and trying to contact and become like the Old Ones.
Going alright?
The Chalice Dungeons being the area where they found the old blood that started it all. The endings are all nice as well. The game sort of builds up the story as you go along. The endings just sort of conclude the ambiguity of the world with more ambiguous final outcomes, which is very much like Lovecraftian stories. Clearly many themes and story elements and areas are inspired of Lovecraft style of cosmic horror, so if you're looking for that, then I couldn't recommend this game more. I think the story is great. Once you start, it just gets you hooked, and was overall a blast to slowly progress through. In conclusion, I am very happy with my experience with Bloodborne, especially since I got the main game for free from the PlayStation Plus collection. The world and atmosphere of Bloodborne has earned a reputation for its great execution of horror, and from my experience, believe it lives up to the expectation without relying too much on cheap tactics from the genre. The gameplay is different enough to have a nice spin on the Souls type of formula, while still keeping many familiar aspects. Most levels were enjoyable, though I do think the Chalice Dungeons were a bit repetitive and bland at times. The story is the best out of the 3 From Software games I've played, and I would even highly recommend just watching YouTube videos about it if you don't want to play the game. I also finished the DLC as well, but depending on how well this video does, I might do a separate review for the DLC, as I think it is big enough for its own smaller video, but I'll see how things go down the line. Anyway, this has been the Hero of Sinnoh. Thanks for watching.
So what town is this?
I have no
Is it a trio? Yeah.
idea. It's like fishing town over. What the heck was that? Woo!